Hi everyone, welcome to Kioto Aoki's solo album preview. Her debut album is called No Traffic in Space, and it is absolutely terrific and thoughtful. And I'm honored to be introducing Kyoto's work today. She's a close friend. We met through our friends at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, where we were both pursuing our MFA degrees. And back then, I knew her as a photographer, so I was surprised and delighted to learn more about her prowess as a musician. This last summer, Kyoto invited me to be a part of a visual art exhibition called Shiko Kairo 2, organized by Asian Improv Arts Midwest. And it was during this time that I became more familiar with the breadth and mission of the organization. And I'm also now working with AIRMW to research the underrepresented histories of Asian American musicians in the Midwest from post-World War II to today. And it has been incredibly enlightening and inspiring to be speaking with Tatsu, Kyoto's father, who is leading this archival project. Together, we have been interviewing Asian American creatives who have played a significant role in shaping Chicago's cultural landscape. The work of AIRMW is absolutely crucial, and I'm excited to be talking about Kyoto's inspiring and multifaceted creative practice with all of you tonight. So thank you for joining us. So that was doing setting her drum. So hi, Olivia.
Hi. We're so glad to have. I'm Olivia. I'm with Experimental Sound Studio, and we're so glad to have both you and Kyoto, and then Michael Zerang and Tatsu Aoki coming up.
Yeah. Kyoto handed me her physical album the other day, and I was so excited to see this beautifully tactile object. It's a trifold, features some of her photography as well, and it's I think it really captures both her visual and audio musical practice. Yeah. And Olivia, you're gonna get yours soon too.
Yeah, I'm excited. What it has on the back, there's handwritten too.
Yeah, I think.
I feel like that's just another. So ESS has gotten to have Kyoto curated 3 different performances for us in 2020, and really hopped on board with experimenting with this virtual space that we've all found ourselves in. And so I love seeing this record because I feel like it really taps into some of the conversations that we had in those other performances, which are archived on ESS's YouTube. So y'all can go check them out if you missed them. But we talked a lot about gesture and this gesture that's involved in Taiko and how it's really part of a choreography, in addition to being an oral practice. And so I feel like that comes through in this album cover and a lot of her visual work too, this idea of gesture, even down to the handwriting on the back of the album cover. So yeah, it's a beautiful thing to see. And everyone, y'all should know that you can pick up the album on AIRMW's website. Go to airmw.org/album-release, and that's where you can find it. And they have a whole slew of releases happening this weekend. So I know that there's something at Elastic tomorrow. And yeah, I don't know what do you know more about those releases?
Yeah, I think tomorrow at Elastic Arts, there'll be a lineup with Kyoto and Mai Sujimoto and Dawei Wang. So they also have albums that are being released tomorrow.
Amazing. So awesome. Yeah, so everyone go to, thank you. Gregory Bay is putting it in the chat right now, that information. So everyone should go to that link and check out more information, and check out those performances. And I was going to say something else. I had another point. Yeah, it's amazing to see so many releases all at once, and exciting to be able to hear and to see this awesome music. This is what I wanted to say. Remember we're gonna have some more music in a second. We just got word that they're just about ready for us. But everyone, make sure to put your questions in the chat because this is all happening live. So feel free to ask questions, and Kyoto will feed them to Kyoto at the end after this next set. But maybe if you're ready, Jennifer, maybe we'll go over back to the music.
Yeah. That wonderful performance, Kyoto.
Hello.
That was Wedlock. Was that Wedlock?
Oh, sorry, I didn't hear. Yes, that was a piece called Wedlock from my album.
Yeah. You had told me that that song was originally from your father's album that was named after you, right?
Yes.
Kyoto.
So that song featured legendary Michael Zerang on drum, and my father, Tatsu Aoki, on bass. And my father has a CD for all of us children. And, I'm the firstborn, so he made his early album. I have it here. This old school. Oh, it's a little tricky to see. Cover.
Oh, yeah. Is that your hand?
It is my hand. And I've talked about it before. I use my hand in a lot of my works as well. And perhaps it's kind of unconscious osmosis situation, but this is the album called Kyoto. And the first song of this album is Wedlock. And that was my father and Michael Zerang playing. And we can hear a little bit of an excerpt from that. Let's see if we can. Can you all hear or no?
I don't hear the music.
Oh, here we go. Sorry, let's try it again. Okay, now I got it. Now that's the groove, the main groove. But that's a song called Wedlock, and I listened to this album a lot as a kid because it had my name on it. This is, when I'm 4 or 5-ish, and I know that this is my album, and this is the first song that I would hear every time I put it in the CD player, and it was just a lovely phrase that has stuck with me, and so I felt that for my first own solo album, I would like to kind of recreate this piece. And the original one is just my father and Michael Zerang playing, and so I decided to add myself in this one to kind of come full circle. And also Michael, I grew up listening to and watching Michael Zerang, and of course I know that he and my father have, had a long friendship, so they very graciously agreed to be on this track in this album. So, of course, today's a different version than what you'll hear on the album, as is everything. But yes, that's Wedlock.
So one of the questions that we got from the audience is if it was improvised, and so obviously some parts of it are not, but are some parts of it improvised?
It's all improvised, and it's just that the phrase that my father had played. The original track is Michael playing on the drums. Dun, dun, go, go, do, go, dun. Like there's this phrase, and then the bass line, that's Wedlock. So we're just, improvising on that phrase. But yeah, it's all improvised.
So how do you pick which improvised version you want to keep on the album? How does that process work?
I'm kind of a purist in that I try to do one take, two max. And it was between 1 and 2 there. But and I think that's the nature of this kind of music, is that once it doesn't work very well, you lose the energy and the spirit if you play it over and over and over again. So even in the album, it's really just, let's gather together on this day of recording, we'll play through it, and if that's it, that's it. And it sounds, it keeps that, I think, spirit of the musicality and the energy up. So I think this was the first take in the album, which is usually the best.
Awesome. Yeah. I'm curious if this is the right space to also ask about your visual practice and whether you see, your musical practice also how they influence one another. Because I definitely can see some semblances in the visual and the musical work. They're both, very spare with an awareness to pattern and repetition. And I'm thinking about your show currently at the International Museum of Surgical Science, which, if you all haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. It's amazing and responsive to history and the site. But yeah, I was curious if you could talk about any of the threads that you see in, both the visual and the musical work.
Sure. I think it's only been the last few years that I've been able to contextualize my musical practice and my visual practice and understand kind of how philosophically they intertwine. And I think it's because music I've just been playing on stage since I was very young, and it's, I didn't go to school for it, and visual arts, I went to art school. But I'm learning that they're just different, I think, modes of expression. And I am a minimalist, and I am very aware of material and process. And with my visual work, that's, in the analog medium. So that's the camera, that's the shutter, that's the celluloid, this sort of thing, printing process. And then with Taiko, it's about kind of the textures of sound is what I can play with. And that was kind of what I was trying to do with the second piece you saw today. And on the album, it's called First Lesson, where the tenteke phrase starts to become like a sonic soundscape. And it's much more about the subtle nuances of this very repetitive thing that's happening. And that actually was the first lesson. When I first started Taiko, my earliest memories of Taiko were playing with my brother and my father on stage, and my brother was the improviser. So he was in the front playing his thing, doing his thing, and I was the support system playing the bass, or the G essentially. So it really was, 4 minutes, 6 minutes, 10 minutes until my brother decided he was finished with his solo. But and thinking about really what I can play with and how I can really work with the medium itself. And I try not to think of my drumming as rhythmic. I think it's inherently rhythmic because it is a percussive instrument, but I'm more interested in musical phrasing. And I think that philosophy and approach also applies to my visual practice, where I do work in series. I have many, many frames that make up a body of work. And it's kind of more of a visual, I think, rhythm or phrasing, if you will. So, in this album too, it's the cover looks like this. It's me in many different positions, because I think the visual relationship of how I'm playing and moving my body is really important to understand the song and the pieces. So I wanted to share that. But it also really ties into my thinking about frames and the sequence of frames, movement within and between frames. And some of my images are also on the inside of this that our designer beautifully placed together.
Are those self-portraits? Did you take the photographs of yourself?
I did. I had help with the shutter So thank you to my sister for assisting. But yes, and that's also important too in my own practice, in my photographic work, that I'm usually the one photographing myself, or my hands are in there, but I'm also the one pressing the shutter, and it's very self-reflexive cycle. I think of being in front of and behind the lens is also important. So,
one of the questions we've gotten from the audience is, do you approach each different drum uniquely?
I'm sorry, say the last part again.
Do you approach each different drum uniquely?
Oh, yes. Of course, there are specific characteristics, say, of the smaller drum that don't exist in the larger drum. And I'm also playing the old daiko, which is the huge, it's about 50-something inches diameter across in this album as well. So there, of course, are certain ways that you can play each one and certain sounds that are different. But I'm also very aware of how I'm composing myself in relationship to the drum. So the setup, the physical setup. And again, this is why it was important for me to show the various positions that I am playing these drums in. So there's a piece where I'm playing the shime, which is a small one here, sitting down. And there's a piece where I'm playing the same shime standing up. And it's the same drum, of course, but very different relationship because of how I am, playing and hitting the drum. So I'm also very aware of that too. And you can see the middle-sized chudaiko, you can play diagonally, you can play up high, you can play it flat, and they're the same, instrument, but it changes drastically depending on your physical, I think, proximity and relationship to it.
Can I ask a little bit just to follow up on that, and then thinking about you're going from being the rhythm supporting your brother improvising. I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about your own evolution within this practice, and when did you move into improvising, and how has that kind of evolved up into, I think also within that, why release a solo taiko album right now?
Yeah, well, improvisation has always been a part of the practice in this particular lineage that I come from. And I think that's why our music, in our organization, we've had a long, collaboration with improvisational music, experimental music, because of this nature of, the improvisational, cyclical sort of thing and textural explorations. But yeah, I think in the beginning it was just practical that my brother started taiko, and I guess I wanted to. He's younger than me, but in the first lesson was, okay, to see if you can keep time. And that's very essential. That everything that I'm playing does have a certain kind of time. And I think the understanding of time is not necessarily the same as perhaps Western music or classical music, because this is a folk tradition. It's a Japanese tradition that certainly does not function within, your 4/4 counting system. But I think just in the past few years, I grew up around this music, I think, and I was put on stage at an early age, so I didn't really have a choice. But it did take a while for me to understand what was really my voice. I guess is the question you're asking, like when I've shifted from supporting my brother, supporting, kind of our group that I lead now, to, solo artists. And that really has only happened, or maybe that I've only embraced that in the last 2 years, I think. And it's, was time to also acknowledge that I want to pursue this path as, a taiko artist as well as a visual artist. And one of the ways also to make musical work is to release albums, in the same way that you would print photographs and do installations and this sort of thing. So yeah, I'm still learning and developing and figuring out my language, and I'm understanding what I am best at and what I want to kind of make as my own as a taiko player. And I think I really like exploring this choreographic element of taiko that is often forgotten when Taiko's presented, to in a more commercial setting, I think, and forgetting that it's really about dance, and that dance in space it really is also part of the musicality. It's not just about rhythm, it's not just about patterns, and it's not about how loud or how fast you can play, but there are a lot more subtle, nuances that can be explored with Taiko.
Yeah. Do you ever, now I'm thinking about, oh, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I was just thinking about the choreography, and I think that that's what struck me the first time that I saw you play was also when you told me that you were coming out with this album. And so thinking about how tied the music is to the gesture, and now this music is going out into the world without, it has the gesture on the front still, which I really appreciate, having that connection. But you ever think about working with dancers as separate from your movements now that the music is kind of going out separate from the choreography in a way? That's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think it was part of also my my thought process in making this album, exactly as you said, like what happens when you take away the visual aspect of it. And I for me, it's hard for me to separate really the physical relationship to the music, not just because it's coming out of my body, but because that's, I think, also how you experience it visually, and you understand, you can hear me getting tired, but you can see me getting tired. Where in the album, I can hear myself getting tired, but it doesn't really make sense if you're not understanding, I'm twirling and moving between two drums. So I think, yeah, that's still a question that I'm beginning to explore and understand, and trying to figure out my relationship to it, as to how my relationship to dance and performance. I'm not a dancer, but I certainly do move, and there are elements of dance in my work. And in my film work too, I'm very interested in the movement of the camera, of the apparatus. So there are certainly proximal conversations around dance there as well. But it's I don't know if I have a great answer for that. It's certainly there, and yeah, it's also something to think about.
Yeah, it wasn't a great question, but I guess I'm thinking about, as I look forward to playing this in my own home, I'm already thinking about how I will want to move to it. And so it's this interesting collage of different experiences that
I think all music should make you want to move, and that's the beauty of it. You can watch me play and move, but I would also like everyone to, groove and dance on their own as well. Yeah, definitely. But yeah, and I think we're now ready to share with you just a few more pieces, since Michael and my father have so generously joined me today. And one of the next pieces is called Velvet Bell. That's also on the album, but it's an homage to the Velvet Lounge, of course, which is a legendary club run by the late Fred Anderson, who was my father's mentor, and I kind of grew up understanding what that place was. And I always do talk about the story where here in the US, you have this Take Your Child to Work Day holiday, and my friends went to their parents' lawyers' offices and doctors' offices and corporate offices, and I went to Velvet Lounge because that's where I was working in music. And Michael Zerang here, he recently received a sconce, I think a light sconce is what it's called, from the Velvet Lounge space, and he brought it to the recording, and he's like, there's this new instrument. I mean, I'm playing it as a bell, so why not play something with it? So that's one of the pieces we'll share with you today. And then I'll be back to answer more questions after the next set.
Thank you.
Hello. Thanks for that. Just trying to get my Twitch to load. Kind of worked. Yeah.
So that was featuring Michael Zerang in Tatsu Aoki.
Nice. Yeah. Sorry, what was that?
Oh, I was thinking about the question you asked earlier, about how I feel about becoming a album releasing artist. And as I was playing, I was thinking, yeah, it's part of, the sharing the stage, I think, over the years with Michael and Hamid and Muata and Ed and all of these legends in Chicago. And for a long time, I was, the newest person in the group, kind of the youngster that they're all, supporting me in everything I do. I mean, all of the mistakes that I've made, and, they're always there to support me. And I feel like I'm now starting to find ways that I can express myself musically and find a space for myself within the musical conversation and place on stage. And so, I think this album also has helped with that, and to be able to, ask my father and Michael to be like, hi, I'm doing an album and I would like you to be a part of it, and to kind of be recognized as I think equal is a strong word, because I'm absolutely not their equal. They are way my seniors, but it's part of that journey. I think you just saw happen is what I was trying to say. That that experience, over 20 plus years of my life, you kind of saw the last section there, where I'm able to now have a musical conversation with everyone once. Just an afterthought.
Amazing. So, here's a question coming in from the chats. What new projects are you interested in as a solo professional taiko artist in Chicago?
I have my ideas for the next 2 albums.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I have the concept for it, and I think that's also similar to how my music work and my visual practice ties together, is that I'm often I'm very much a conceptual artist, and that the work is based on a narrative and as much as a process. And so I have the concepts for the next 2 albums, and I'm excited to now feature and kind of record, I think, my experiences or collaborations with all the artists that I grew up with. And I would love to continuously kind of amass a personal archive that I get to keep, as part of my own vision. Yes, I've also started to work on another group album with our taiko group. So we're in production for that, coming out in the next few years. But that's as a group, but also myself as a solo artist leading kind of this new generation, and also our performing artists. I guess also figuring out ways, like Olivia was saying, to figure out ways to collaborate with dancers and choreographers and other musicians and visual artists as well with my music in a way that I don't feel like I felt comfortable with before. It felt quite forced. So in any case, yeah.
Kyoto, can you also talk about no traffic in space and how you came up with the concept behind the album was, where the names come from, the titles? Yeah.
Title
more about that.
A beloved friend of mine, Cecilia Shizuhua, who was texting me on her way back home overseas. And she was saying, because of the pandemic, there's no traffic in the airspace. And I thought, wow, that's really great. It's an idea, it's a concept. And a lot of my work really, in musical work too, is really about accentuating the space. In Taiko, in terms of the phrasing and the musicality, emphasizing the spaces that you don't hit, and not considering them as negative spaces, but as potent spaces. So the spaces I don't hit allow me to move, and that the choreography becomes part of it. But you're also much more aware of kind of the musical phrasing versus the rhythm, when you're considering that. And that's a very East Asian and Japanese philosophy, this weight of space, what we call ma, the space-time relationship with that. So I thought that was a beautiful way to kind of consolidate all of my thoughts and present my philosophical approach to music. But yeah, in terms of the entire album, it's really paying homage to all of the early experiences I had with music. So my first memories playing on stage with my brother and my father, going to the Velvet Lounge, seeing Michael play, knowing of these figures and Chicago legends, and then of course listening to Wedlock and this sort of thing, that kind of formed the foundation, I think, of my practice.
I have a technical question about the album from the audience from Ecuador. They want to know what your miking techniques were.
So we have worked, I want to say over a decade now with our musical recording engineer, Caleb Willits, and we have figured out a way to record taiko and keep it as much as possible the resonance. And I was just telling Michael Zerang and Ralph here about it, but I think that taiko is really hard to record because a lot of it is very physical and you have to feel the vibrations. And there's a lot of sonic resonance that maybe the drum set does not have, that gets lost there. So we figured out a way where I think he's using the normal room, I think. Well, you can't really see there. Here. But we worked with our music engineer to figure out a way to mic it. And one of the things is to not mic things too close. Like, it's really important to capture the space around it. So you're trying to, capture the 3D-ness and all of the textual nuances that happen after I'm actually hitting the surface of the drum. So, but that's not my doing. That's Caleb Willits, who's now a master at it, so thank you.
Where did y'all record the album? Was it in a studio or? We
recorded it in our warehouse, which is our dojo studio space, where Taiko Dojo is. Currently we're occupying Japanese American Service Committee space. And so it's a huge warehouse space, about 3,000 feet, I want to say, at least. And so the drums really resonate there. And we found out that, the sound is certainly different when you're recording in a studio, which we have done before. But this particular album was all done at JASC.
Awesome. Another question is, do you have thoughts or are there possibilities on joining your music and visual practices within one piece in the future?
I don't know. I think this album is quite close in that it has my music and it has my photos, and it presents my shared approach to music and the image, the photographic image. I don't think that I would photograph myself drumming as a series. I did for the sake of the album. I wouldn't make a film about, me playing taiko, that sort of thing. But I think there certainly are ways to connect my two practices. So I'm absolutely open to it, and I'm still searching, I guess, for ways to make that work in a less kind of didactic way.
I have a couple questions. Or Olivia, are there more viewer questions?
There's one more audience question right now. So you says, or they say, taiko player and ethnomusicologist Deborah Wong suggests that part of the appeal of the taiko lies in the redefinition of the Asian American woman's body. To what extent do you consider this idea in your taiko playing practice?
Yes. I think this conversation is really relevant now, and I am aware of the fact that taiko historically was only available for men, of course, and contemporary taiko players too mostly are men, and there's a whole conversation about how taiko is presented, which is this very powerful physical experience, and so you have to have a certain kind of endurance for that, and many, I think, commercial applications of taiko really present this male body, and it's all about the physique and the musculature again, and how fast and impressive one can play this huge drum for a set number of minutes. And yeah, I think I am aware that I am a woman who is playing in a male-dominated field, but I'm more interested in I think the relationship between taiko and musical aesthetics and art, more so than I think the politicized body, if that makes sense, at least in my practice. But certainly I'm aware, and it is something that you hear all the time. Like, oh, I'm surprised. It's nice to see kind of a female drummer playing. Yeah, so, but in terms of my own explorations and presentation, I would hope that the way that I am playing, kind of incorporating choreography in the space and the musicality and the phrasing, and an aesthetic of nuance is what would be kind of the appeal for my work.
That's it from the chats for right now.
Okay. I guess I'll ask my questions back to back if that's okay, Kyoto. Yeah, so I'm curious, how do you incorporate and innovate upon tradition, like you're using the taiko and these other traditional Japanese folk instruments, and what gravitated you towards these instruments, besides like your family history? Because I know for some people that might sometimes feel like a deterrent in a way, like this burden or pressure to carry a lineage. So I'm curious what your relationship is with these instruments. And then my second question, again, tying back to your visual practice, is you're employing these traditional and almost nostalgic mediums using analog photography to draw awareness to, say, like the history of space, like your show at the Museum of Surgical Science. And I was just wondering if you think that there's a correlation between your tools or your tools of expression, like the cameras that you use and the musical instruments that you use. They're all very like, they're instruments that carry a lot of history. So curious about that, how you're, iterating or responding to these lineages in a way.
Sure.
Sorry, that's a very long question.
I'm gonna try to answer all aspects of it. I think, well, I really was drawn to the instrument because it was part of my family. And when I was younger, it really was just my brother started playing, and I saw him playing, and I wanted to play with him. I don't particularly remember that moment, but so I've been told. And that just, I think, evolved into performing, have a group, leading a group, now I have students, this sort of thing. But now I'm able to, I think, intellectualize the work that I have been doing as part of the Japanese community, Japanese American community, but also within the arts, and trying to, present a more folk tradition and a non-institutionalized practice within the context of contemporary art. and try to have conversations about how these two traditions, I think, can happen. And I think oftentimes folk art is often dismissed as just craft or very communal, which it certainly is. But I'm now at a place where I can kind of explore, I think, these conversations as an artist and as someone who wants to present this as her practice. And in terms of what draws me now, or what keeps me here, I think, is I'm very much interested and drawn to the philosophies of this old pedagogical kind of methodology, which is learning by practicing in space, in a more organic, intuitive form of learning, and that you don't go to classes, in the same way that you go to piano classes and lessons, and you don't write anything. This is an oral tradition, and you really have to have a master, and it's a master apprenticeship relationship where you spend years and years learning from your teacher, who happens to be my father, and that's the way that these classical traditions have been passed down and really can only be passed down. And there's a certain discipline and relationship to time and, of course, dedication that I value. I mean, I think that analog photography is the same way, that the philosophical idea of working with light and time while you're developing, and there is time between the image that you shot and when you actually see it, and this the way that you now then have to think about the materials that you're working with, that you don't have anymore in digital photography. And I see kind of correlations in these two approaches for photographic image and Taiko. But it really is about this very traditional ideology. And sometimes I feel like I'm very much stuck in the past, but I do think that there's a way to apply, I think, these values and to continue to practice and preserve these values today. So, it doesn't mean that I'm obviously playing in a much more contemporary context, like I'm wearing non-traditional clothes and I'm wearing sneakers. I also do play in traditional, forms as well, wearing kimono and a particular setup, but I think I'm still trying to preserve a certain aesthetic and a certain ideology within my work, and that really has to do with paying attention to the quietude and details and nuances. So I hope that answered it all.
Yeah, that was really great.
I feel like it's so interesting to, it makes so much sense when you talk about it in this way, that y'all are part of so immersed in the improvising community in Chicago, because it is such a continuum of tradition and continual evolution, kind of within a continuum of a practice. So
yeah, it's certainly, and it's like I was always brought up and taught that to learn jazz you have to go to the clubs and you have to play on stage and learn that way, and not by reading what's the word in English? Reading music. Yeah, sheet music. And that's one particular, of course, history tradition, but the kind of music that we play really, it can't be taught in classroom. You have to go out and you have to experience it, and it can't be just a year or 2 years. It really has to be in 30 years, and okay, you're kind of there. Not even, I mean, you've, it's after 60 plus years that you really are beginning to understand your medium. And I very much appreciate that, I think, way of thinking.
Well, so you are, you have a lot coming up. You have an Elastic show coming up this weekend, and then we get to have 2 more shows with you through the quarantine concerts this year. So I wonder if you could talk about those and any other upcoming things.
Sure. Well, this weekend is the official release. So tomorrow's the official release day of my solo album. But I'm actually one of 3 individual artists that Jennifer had already introduced, Mai Sugimoto and Dawei Wang and myself. We are all releasing our debut solo albums through Asian Improv Arts Midwest's record label, which is Asian Improv Records. So tomorrow is kind of the official full lineup. And you can catch us at 7 p.m. Central Time on Elastic Arts channel, their Twitch channel. And then you will be able to purchase the albums. It's more along the lines, if you give us a donation, we will happily send you an album in return. And you can find all the info on AIRMW.org. And that's this weekend. And the other 2 things in the summer with ESS are one's in the summer and one's in the fall. And last year, Olivia invited me to do a curatorial series, kind of merging the sound community with the visual arts community. Maybe that's too broad, but from as for myself, as a musician, as a visual artist, we were talking about presenting a program that invited also visual artists who were thinking about sound as image makers. So I invited film makers to do an online presentation, and of course utilizing this online platform as we were in the quarantine season. So I will have a continuation, season 2 of Systems of Vision this year, one in June and one in October. So yes, and then Jennifer also mentioned that she met me at our Shikol Kaido show that we put on last year, also where I met Olivia. Yes, but that's a show that's gathering Asian and Asian American artists who have ties in Chicago and presenting artists who are actually of the Asian diaspora, but not making work about the Asian diaspora, because we think that part of the conversation that's often excluded when talking about inclusivity specifically is presenting artists of color who are not making work about being artists of color, like myself. So this is Shikol Kaido 3, and that's going to be co-presented at the Joby Art Center, and it opens April 16th. And Jennifer is also part of that. Yeah, so I'm curating that as well, so that's upcoming program. Yes, and we have many exciting things lined up for throughout the summer and into the fall that you can see all of the information on AIRMW.org.
Awesome. I put that link in the chat too, so y'all are great about keeping all of the many different events and things that you're doing updated on there.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you to ESS, the whole ESS team. It's been so lovely to work with them and continue to work with them. Thank you to Olivia and Ralph who are here today, this evening. Thank you to Jennifer and Michael Zerang and my father, Tatsu, and Asian Improv Arts Midwest, who produced my album, as well as Mai Sugimoto and Dawei Wang's. So again, if you're interested, you should join us tomorrow evening, 7 p.m. on the Elastic Arts channel to listen to the full kind of reveal of the season's releases. And yes, we hope you enjoyed the show, and we will see you next time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.